Hello, this is Mr. Peak and this is lesson 3 of Python programming. So last lesson we looked at variables and how we use them with inputs inside of Python, and this lesson we're looking at conditional statements and using those with inputs to start forming a back and forth between yourself and the computer. So to get started, what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly recap what we did with variables, just so I'm sure that you've got the knowledge moving forward in this lesson to be able to sort of engage with the tasks. So remember, a variable is a location in the memory in which we can temporarily store some information that we can then use. It's like an empty box and you put something inside of it and then you've written a name on that box. We could choose a name for that variable. And remember, there are rules when we name variables, so the name of the variable has to sort of correlate or have something to do with the information we're storing inside of it. So here I've got two examples. I've got name equals Mr. Peak, so I'm storing someone's name inside of this variable here, so I've called it name because that makes sense. And then here I'm asking for an input, so I'm asking someone to enter their age, and of course I've named that variable age because that's appropriate to the information that's stored inside. So if you do need a more sort of comprehensive recap of variables, please go back to video 2 of lesson 2, because you do need this knowledge moving forward. Okay, so let's move on to the main content for this lesson, conditional statements, or if statements for short. So if statements are used in Python programming and programming in general to force a decision in a program depending on what inputs it's received. So I've got a little example for you here in just plain English. If nobody saw me do it, then I might get away with it, else you've been caught. So there are two states if you've done something wrong. You're either caught and you're busted, or you've gotten away with it. So it's the same concept in Python. We can enter some information, or based on some inputs, the computer will make a decision to decide to go one way or the other. And this is how we create that process. So let's take a look at what that looks like inside of Python. So here I've created a really simple password checker. Just like you probably go through every time you log onto your computer, you enter your password. If you've gotten it correct, it lets you log on. If you've gotten it incorrect, it doesn't, and you have to try again. So here's what a really simple password checker would look like inside of Python. So here I've got just two really simple print statements. Welcome to PGO Security Systems, and then just some stars to sort of show where you would enter your password. And then here I've got a variable. So just like we did with last lesson, I've created a variable with an input to allow the user to enter some information just like you would when you enter a password, and I'm saying input and then enter your password is the prompt. So of course I have called my variable password because I'm storing the password that the user enters inside of that variable. So now that we've entered our password, the computer's going to need to do something. It's going to need to check that password. It's going to need to check whether it's correct, and it lets you log in, or whether it's incorrect and tells you that the password's incorrect. So let's take a look at that if statement in action. So here we've got for 5 lines of code. So it starts with if password, and remember password is the name of our variable here, and then we have two equal signs. So in Python this means equal to. So what this means is whatever is stored inside of password, so whatever the user entered, it's going to check to see if that's equal to the password stored in this string here. Notice the speech marks is going to check whatever we've entered against this. And if it compares them and says, what the user entered is the same as what we've got stored in here, then tell them access granted and they've logged in. Else, this else statement covers any other possibility. So the only other possibility in this case is, well, the password I entered didn't match the password that's stored here, and it's telling me I can't log in. And then, in a more advanced program, you give the user the option to enter their password again, and they get another chance, just like you would at home. So let's have a look at how that works in Create with Code. So we've got the Create with Code program, and then let me move over to my password checker. So here I've gotten a little bit more advanced. I've asked for the user's name and stored that in a variable, and then printed hello along with their name, and then I've asked to check their password. So let's click run. So let's enter my name, Mr. Peak, and it says hello Mr. Peak, and then I can enter my password. So I know from here that the password that the computer actually wants is ABCD1234. So let's try that, ABCD1234, and then press OK. So imagine this as you've just entered your password on your computer. So I'm going to click OK. And it tells me access granted, because what I entered is the same as what's stored there. But let's have another go. Let's say I enter ABCD1234 because I have accidentally tapped the 5 key as I was typing out the password. So now that we know is the password that I'm entering doesn't match the one there, because I've got a 5 on the end and that one doesn't. So if I try to click OK now, it doesn't work. It asks me to enter the password again. Oh, my mistake. I've entered ABCD12345 as my name. ABCD12345. Right, let's try that again. Okay, so the password I entered doesn't match the one stored here. So it says access denied. So this is just a really simple checker. I could change what's stored in here. So I could change the password it's checking against to maybe password 123. And now, for example, if I entered ABCD1234, what the password was previously, if I press OK, after I enter my name, need to remember that this time, so ABCD1234, and press OK, it says access denied, because the password stored here is no longer the same as that, so it doesn't work. So if I now click run, and then just enter G, and then password as password 123, tells me access granted. So whenever you want to compare what's stored inside of a variable to a string, you just type out whatever you're comparing it against to what's stored inside these speech marks, because remember these two equal signs means equal to. So if I switch back over to the presentation now, that's a really brief overview of how password checkers work and, in essence, how conditional statements work. So there are a few key rules that we need to follow when we're creating if statements. Just like we did when we create print statements, when we use variables, we have to follow those rules, because if we don't, the computer doesn't understand. So there are a few key rules of syntax that we need to follow. The first one is indentation. So to indent on your keyboard, you just need to press the key that says tab on it. And what this does is it creates an extra space. So let me move back to create with code and show you how that works. So here we have create with code again, and you can see here that while all this is against sort of the far left hand side, these two aren't. These are what we call indented. If I press back and I try to press run, the program doesn't work. What this means is this line of code here falls sort of under, like imagine a hierarchy. This falls under the line of code that's above. So this will only happen if this one here is true. So if the password matches password, then it will do this. So you need to make sure that you indent the line of code that falls under your if condition or else condition, or else if as we get further in the lesson. You need to make sure that you press that tab key just once, and then your program will work. The second key rule of syntax is this semicolon here. As you can see, at the end of both the if statement and the else statement, I've got this little semicolon. That's to say this line of code has ended, and what falls underneath this semicolon that's indented is the condition that happens if this is true. So again, if we don't have that semicolon and we're not following the correct syntax, we do have that error. So we need to make sure that we use a semicolon. Okay, so let's move back to the presentation. So, remember earlier when I said the term equal to, and we use those two equal signs? This is a good chart to maybe screenshot or save or come back to in the video whenever you were creating if statements, because there are a lot of different ways that we can start comparing things. So for example, here I used equal to in regards to the password because I want to check if what I enter exactly matches the password I've got stored. But we've got some other options. So we've got these two here, the little crocodiles. you use those in math, so we have greater than and less than. So we may be using those, for example, if you're trying to buy a new game and the system wants to check whether you're older than 16, we may do an if statement that says if user's age is greater than the age that they've got stored at 16, then let them buy it. If it's less than, then don't. So we can use many of these different comparison operators to start building different if statements that meet different purposes. So the main task I want you to complete first, or your first task should I say, is a simple program that will check if the user is 18, and if they're not, we'll then tell them they're underage. So you'll first need to create a variable that asks for an input. So think about what you're going to name your variable again, and then start creating that if statement and then the else statement that checks to see if the user is over 18, and if they are, tell them they're an adult, else they're a child. So think back to these comparison operators. If we want to check to see if the user's age is greater than 18, think about which symbol you're going to use. Hint, my mouse is hovering over it right now. And then use that to start creating your if statement. So to get the crocodiles on your screen, what you'll need to do is, you might not have done this before, so I will just show you, is if I use an old image that I showed you how to get the slash, the two crocodiles you can see just above the spacebar, where you normally use the full stop and comma. To get access to them, you'll need to hold the shift key down and then press full stop or comma, depending on which one you want to use. So what I want you to do now is pause the video here, complete this task, make sure that you do save this, because I will be asking you to upload it at the end of the lesson to Teams, and then unpause the video when you finish the task and carry on. Okay, so hopefully you've finished that task. If you are struggling, just post a message in the chat, or scroll back earlier in the video to see the demo again. But let's move on.